Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. While G7 leaders conducted small talks in Canada, Xi Jinping was exchanging fist bumps in Astana. Now buckle up, we're heading to the heart of Eurasia. Xi Jinping's latest stop was Kazakhstan, the land where nomads once roamed and now Chinese high-speed trains hum. Now, this is the Chinese leader's third overseas excursion in 2025, which, by today's belt-tightening standard, is practically a world tour. We'll look at what brought him there and as well as what he managed to leave with. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Kazakhstan on Monday to attend the second China-Central Asia Summit, a pivotal diplomatic gathering aimed at deepening Beijing's influence in the region. The summit brings together the leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, marking the first time all 5 Central Asian nations jointly met with a foreign leader on their own soil. Xi's visit, lasting from June 16th to 18th, underscores China's growing strategic interest in Central Asia amid shifting global alliances and instability, particularly the ongoing conflict between Iran and Israel. Upon arrival, Xi was welcomed by Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, with whom he held bilateral talks to strengthen economic and diplomatic ties. Xi delivered a keynote speech and laid out a strategic roadmap for China's long-term engagement in the region.
There will be no winners in the tariff and trade wars. Unilateralism, protectionism, and hegemony will harm both others and oneself. I always emphasize that you cannot turn the wheel of history back, but only move forward. We need a united world, not a divided one. Humanity should develop along the lines of building a community of common destiny, and not under the rule of the law of the jungle.
Analysts view Xi's presence as a signal that Central Asia holds high strategic value in China's foreign policy, especially as global powers, including the US and Russia, compete for influence in the region.
And now let's zone in on the east-plaining portion of our show. As global powers vie for influence in Central Asia, the C5+1 format has become an important diplomatic tool for engagement with the region's 5 former Soviet republics. While the United States pioneered the framework, China is rapidly leveraging it to expand its economic and strategic foothold.
The C5+1 format refers to a diplomatic platform involving the 5 Central Asian nations: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, plus 1 external power. First launched by the United States in 2015 under then-President Barack Obama, it began as a foreign minister-level initiative. Since then, other powers, including India and China, have adopted similar summits to strengthen regional ties. China's growing engagement in Central Asia is evident in President Xi Jinping's visit to Kazakhstan for the second China-Central Asia Summit. Experts see this as Beijing's attempt to outpace the US in regional influence. China has become the top trading partner for all 5 nations and is investing heavily in infrastructure, including a $8 billion railway through Kyrgyzstan to Uzbekistan. Meanwhile, US tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump have strained economic ties. China uses this to portray itself as a more reliable economic partner. While Russia maintains security influence, especially through the CSTO, China is fast becoming Central Asia's dominant economic power, shifting the region's balance of partnerships.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Alright, first stop, Monday's face-to-face with President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, a Mandarin-speaking Kazakh diplomat turned president. Then it was on to summit with Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, 4 nations that, together with Kazakhstan, form the fastest-growing economic corridor you've ever heard of. So why Kazakhstan? Well, besides picturesque blue domes and a capital city that looks like Blade Runner's dream, the region is the Treasury Department's worst-kept secret. It sits atop a vast deposit of uranium, oil, and rare earth minerals, the raw materials that power everything from nuclear reactors to your smartphone's camera. China has been courting these countries since 2013's Belt and Road launch. They've poured at least $26 billion into Kazakhstan alone. But let's not mistake this for simple resource grabbing. Now, Xi's real game is future-proofing China's economy against a Trump-style tariff situation or even a Washington-led tech embargo. China watched in horror as the West tried to isolate Russia since 2022 and decides to click in its own seatbelt. By strengthening overland trade routes through Kazakhstan and pumping money into solar farms, railways, and aluminum smelters, Beijing is building an economic bunker, complete with a buffet of alternative suppliers and secure supply chains. The Chinese leader is showing up with deals on the table: a 1 million-ton aluminum smelter, oil links to Europe, and other goodies. But if you think Xi is just about economics, think again. This summit is part of Beijing's broader strategy to undercut the US-led global order. From BRICS to Belt and Road, China is assembling rival alliances like a child collecting Pokemon. Gotta catch them all, except them are emerging markets and cash means buying with infrastructure loans. Tokayev's government aims to attract $150 billion in foreign investment by 2029, and he knows placing all eggs in China's basket could mean a geopolitical omelet tinted in red. Yet with Russia's influence waning and the West's purse strings tightening, Xi's checkbook looks awfully tempting. And as the Chinese leader reminds us, in the 21st century, the toughest way to win hearts and minds might just be through steel beams, railway spikes, and a well-timed group photo. So will Kazakhstan truly tilt towards Beijing? While President Tokayev seems keen on balancing East and West, he's fluent in English, Russian, and Mandarin, so his phone predictive text must be a nightmare. But he certainly is uniquely positioned to strike the best deal for his own country. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Pannier, board member of the Caspian Policy Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So today we're trying to examine Xi Jinping's trip to Central Asia and just how impactful that is. And first of all, is it a rare thing for the Chinese president to travel abroad, especially to a place like Central Asia?
No, not at all, actually. I mean, Central Asia is one of the prime stops for them. You got to remember Xi Jinping, his first stop after the COVID pandemic was kind of lifted was also to Central Asia and also to Astana, for that fact. So I wouldn't go so far as to say he's a regular visitor there, but he's certainly no stranger. And particularly his visits to Kazakhstan have been, he must have been there several times. I mean, he first coined the phrase Belt and Road Initiative in Kazakhstan in 2013. So he has a long history of visiting not just Kazakhstan, but Central Asia.
And so why the emphasis on this region? Do you think that there's any sort of intention, cooperation, or is it more as sort of a transit route with the Belt and Road Initiative, like you mentioned?
That's part of it. There's a lot of opportunities in Central Asia. The first thing, as you mentioned, is transit routes and Belt and Road. China had built the infrastructure for what would eventually become Belt and Road in Central Asia in the first decade of this century. The oil pipelines, the gas pipelines, the railways, the roads. It was always seemed to me that China used a model of what it had accomplished in Central Asia between 2000 and 2010 as the basis for expanding that and saying, let's do this as Belt and Road Initiative and make it global. So that they've had a presence there for a long time. Certainly that plays a more important role now. It's much more complicated to move goods from east to west than it was 10 or 15 years ago. We've got the sanctions on Russia, so that route is not really trouble-free, I'll say. It is possible to move goods through there, but still there's a lot of problems with using Russia. We've seen that the shipping lanes in the Red Sea have been threatened by Houthis in Yemen. And now Iran, which they were trying to open up road and railway routes through Iran, there's a big question about that. So Central Asia has gradually become more important as a trade route between Europe and China as the years have gone on. And besides that, there's also the question of Islamic radicalism. Now, Central Asia is a neighbor of China. It is a majority Muslim population. It's the northernmost extension of the Islamic world, actually. So China is very happy to have good ties with the Central Asian governments because it really wants the Central Asian governments to help screen out any potential Islamic threats that might filter through from places like Afghanistan or possibly all the way from the Middle East and trying to go through Central Asia and enter China through the back door, so to speak, into the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So there's a lot of things that bring the countries together, and certainly China has a lot of interest in seeing the Central Asian governments remain stable and good trade partners.
All right. Do you think that with all these stores open for China by Central Asia, it would be able to avoid like big economic impact if there's any sort of kind of Trump-style tariff that's being imposed?
You know, Xi Jinping brought that up. Without specifically naming the United States, he said in the era of tariffs and trade wars, you know, it's good that I can sit down with my Central Asian counterparts and we can have a normal conversation about trade that doesn't have anything to do with the trade wars or the tariffs. You know, looking at this from the Central Asian perspective, this is great. You know, when there was the economic problems in 2008, the global economic problems, and then again in 2015 when the price of oil dropped, and then during the COVID pandemic. While a lot of the world was having a problem with this, China was a reliable economic partner for Central Asia. It really upped its game, in fact, in Central Asia. So while their trade partners in other parts of the world were having problems, you know, keeping connected with Central Asia, let alone trying to expand trade, China went forward and did expand trade with Central Asia and invested in a lot of projects that the Central Asians need, but that no one else is really very interested in. And I can give you an example of one last year. They built, you know, they built a factory they are building a factory in Uzbekistan right now that produces parts for dump trucks. Right now, who's going to invest in a factory that produces parts for dump trucks in Uzbekistan? You know, and Uzbekistan needs the parts for their own dump trucks and heavy machinery too. But China is willing to invest in those projects as well as the big projects I've mentioned. You know, the multi-billion-dollar gas and oil pipelines that go through Central Asia. They're doing renewables now. So you know, China's been a steady trade partner, even in times of economic upheaval globally.
Now, when we talk about Central Asia, it's always a very tough tug-of-war of influence between China and Russia being sandwiched between these two very aggressive neighbors. So do you think that with Russia now being occupied with Ukraine and China actually toning up its diplomatic efforts, the balance will eventually shift towards their favor?
I think it's unavoidable, and it has been going in that direction for quite some time. You know, I just wrote a paper on that'll come out soon that showed that in the first year after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, China kind of laid back and didn't make any big moves. But since about the middle of 2023, and certainly last year, they invested in a bunch of projects. I named the dump truck project, but that was very small. China's doing wind farms, solar power, helping repair the irrigation canal system in Central Asia. You know, the list goes on and on. It comes to probably well over $20 billion of investment that's been promised, you know, just within the last 2 years. So, you know, when Russia looks at this, Russia can't compete with that. And China is kind of pushing them out. That's really where I think a lot of the symbolism of Xi's visit to Central Asia and the C5 plus China visit comes in. Is that Russia's made some very threatening statements about Central Asia in the last few years, and certainly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Talks among Russian officials about you know, maybe annexing part of northern Kazakhstan after they're done with Ukraine. Comments from Vladimir Putin about Russian historical lands, traditional historical lands, being essentially all of what was the former Soviet Union. When Xi Jinping shows up with his wallet open, as he usually does, and starts talking about, you know, supporting sovereignty and independence of the Central Asian states, this resonates throughout Central Asia and all the way to the Kremlin too. That, you know, it's a veiled statement that China won't sit there and watch while Russia tries to reincorporate parts of Central Asia that China has sunk billions and billions of dollars into. So, you know, he's a welcome guest. And you can be sure that the television stations in all the capitals in Central Asia have been showing his comments about support for Central Asia and support for their sovereignty.
And in the meantime, we also see China kind of toning up its attempt at creating different sort of trade formats, be it BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative, more cooperation projects between like-minded nations, also trying to get the Global South into it as well. And there's no illusion that they're perhaps trying to create a coalition to rival that of the West economically. Do you think that this is something that might be more impactful going forward? There's two lines of thinking when it comes to BRICS, for example. Some people still find it to be irrelevant. Some see it as a potential threat to the Western hegemony. What's your take on this?
Certainly, they would like to think that the organizations like BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there's several of them, would be competitors against Western organizations, whether that's NATO, whether that's the economic G7, things like that. In fact, that they can't really do it. But part of this that underlies these big organizations, China's pushed a lot of these and helped to create them, right? But China uses them independent of actually the organization to build ties. And that's why in Central Asia, for instance, Central Asian countries aren't members of BRICS. They've tried to get them in. Kazakhstan just said that it wouldn't join because it's not the right time, right? But in the meantime, it's meaningful that China is reaching out to the Central Asian countries and showing them that there's alternatives out there to Western organizations that are also competing for influence and the attention of the Central Asian government. So they use that pretty effectively. China, like yesterday at the summit in Astana, China will emphasize the Asian cooperation in Asia. These are Asian countries. China's an Asian country. Central Asian countries are Asian countries. They have a long history together. That's why the first one of these C5 plus China meetings was in Xi'an. Right now, Xi'an long ago was the capital of China, and that was the first time that the Chinese emperor sent an emissary to Central Asia, more than 2,000 years ago. But it's symbolic, and this is something that has meaning for both the Central Asians and for the Chinese. It reinforces the fact that they're not new friends; they're actually longtime neighbors in the region. The other countries have a hard time competing with that because they don't have that kind of history. So. Right. It's something that the Chinese use effectively and that the Central Asians welcome when they hear it.
Like I mentioned, without these type of shared history and also the geopolitical proximity, how's the Western countries trying to compete in that space? And do you think there's any effectiveness to at least kind of creating a counterbalance to the type of influence that China and Russia might have?
Yes. One, the Western nations will rightly, in my opinion, say that the Central Asians should be careful about not falling about distancing themselves from their former colonial master, Russia, and then ending up in a similar situation of economic dependence on China. So it's in the Central Asians' interests to make sure that they have a diverse foreign policy. Now, yesterday I saw some reports, for instance, that said China is the leading trade partner in Central Asia and the leading trade partner in Kazakhstan. That's not true, actually. The leading trade partner and investor in Kazakhstan, specifically Kazakhstan, is the European Union as a bloc, right? So they do have some say in this too. But the message that the Europeans and that the United States try to send to the Central Asians is that it's good that China's helping you out. They are your neighbor. They're right there. But in the meantime, don't end up being economic colonies of China, and your way to prevent that is by making sure that you keep robust, strong ties with other Western nations who can also provide a lot of the things that China can provide, especially at a time when they're looking at critical raw materials. Western knowledge, Western experience in mining and production and processing would be invaluable to Central Asians, and they know that. And so they're in talks with Western countries, companies from Western countries, as well as with Chinese companies.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express.
Great. Thank you for the invitation.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East I don't want to miss. The United States has quietly disbanded a little-known working group formed to explore ways to pressure Russia into peace talks with Ukraine.
Created between March and April 2025, the group aimed to develop policy options for President Trump if he chose to adopt a tougher stance on Russia, according to a Reuters report citing US authorities. The team, coordinated by the National Security Council, included officials from the intelligence community and the Departments of State, Treasury and Defense. Proposals ranged from covert operations to diplomatic efforts targeting Russia's allies. However, internal skepticism and the shift in Trump's tone toward a less confrontational approach contributed to the group's decline. The effort became defunct after key National Security Council staff were dismissed in May. It remains unclear if Trump was fully aware of the group's work. Critics have faulted Trump for his accommodating posture towards Russia amid the ongoing conflict in Ukraine.
Surging food prices and shrinking household budgets are becoming increasingly more impactful in Russia. Local consumers are increasingly turning to cheaper staples like bread and pasta, substituting once affordable vegetables.
The average price of potatoes, Russia's dietary staple, rose by 173% year-on-year by May 2025, the sharpest increase in 23 years. As a result, potato consumption dropped 8% in early 2025. Meanwhile, sales of bread, pasta and grains rose by 6%, 5% and 3% respectively. Other vegetables also saw steep price hikes, with onions up 41% and cabbage nearly 57%. In contrast, pasta and grains became more affordable, helping drive demand. Despite government attempts to portray the shift as a move toward better quality food, experts say the trend reflects growing economic strain. The government is considering price controls for key vegetables through fixed supply retailer contracts under the proposed Borscht Index. While food remains the only consumer sector with growth, sales of non-foods goods have stagnated, signaling broader economic challenges.
North Korea will send 6,000 military personnel to Russia's Kursk region to aid in reconstruction efforts following Ukrainian attacks, according to the state media. Now, this includes 1,000 sappers to clear mines and 5,000 military construction workers to rebuild damaged infrastructure.
The announcement coincided with Russian Security Council chief Sergei Shoigu's visit to Pyongyang, where he met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Shoigu noted plans to establish war memorials, including a museum in Pyongyang, to honor North Korean soldiers allegedly killed while aiding Russia. North Korea has become a key ally of Moscow since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, reportedly supplying arms and troops. Shoigu's visit is part of the ongoing implementation of a strategic partnership agreement between the two nations, which includes a mutual defense clause. Both countries emphasized the rapid development of what they called a comprehensive strategic partnership during recent high-level talks.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.